Presenting in this section is myself, Michael Howe, Director of Technical Marketing. Co-presenting with me and driving our user interface will be our CTO and co-founder, Olivier Hunvan. Yep. So just to jump right into it, the way we've structured this is to really give you a sense of what it's like to work with Gluware. And as Jeff said before, we kind of cut our teeth on IWAN, where we had an engine that said we know how to configure it, and it kind of does it for you, very prescriptive, but very kind of somewhat rigid, because there are certain designs that work. What you'll see from us now is a platform that is providing multiple solutions and has multiple entry points. So it's not necessarily meant to replace things you have working, right? If there are pain points, like QoS is a pain point, or deploying NAC is a pain point, or just understanding a network inventory is a pain point, this is where Gluware can fit and help and possibly replace other tools. The intention is not necessarily to replace other tools. Most enterprises we're going into are replacing manual and script and spreadsheet-based management, and they don't have the capability or the interest to build a team that manages scripts, is really what it comes down to. So when we introduce them to a platform that allows the ability to solve some of their problems very quickly, it's of interest, and we can show return on that investment very, very quickly. So with that, we'll jump into the very first use case. I like this one a lot because a question was asked, several questions have been asked of the pain of brownfield, right? This image here depicts the brownfield, which are different platforms in different states that have been there over years, and right, it's a bit of a messy situation. So to go in and start to apply cleanup or knowledge to it is difficult, like you mentioned. Getting automation working is not extremely hard, but making it work when there's lots of complexity in the network and lots of different scenarios to deal with, that's when it's really hard. But the starting point of it is actually just understanding what you're trying to automate. What are the network devices? What state are they at? What is my inventory? And also getting a sense of what is changing. Meaning monitoring the configuration change. I like to use the analogy of a virus alerted detection is that if I'm detecting a lot of threats, I need to take action and do something about it. One way we have with an app we introduced last year called Config Drift, just monitoring change and being notified of change in your network gives the user the ability to have oversight as to what is changing, and then look at, hey, maybe we should be automating that. Or if you're paying an external company to implement those changes, maybe we can bring that in-house. If it's, we're spending a lot of money outsourcing it, maybe that is something we can bring in-house. So what you're going to see in this first demo is using Gluware Control, which is our orchestration automation platform. We're running version 3.3, which is releasing later this month. It has a new automated capability of discovery, pulling in that inventory of what you have running in the network. Once you have your inventory discovered, we then are going to enable config drift with monitoring and monitoring of config change. So this very first demo is actually not implementing any changes on your network. It's understanding what's going on in your network. So this first step is kind of knowing the problem, getting visibility, and then running with it. So with that, I'm going to have Olivier switch over to the UI and kick off the first demo.
Okay. So let me move this here.
And I realize, watching a user interface on this screen might be a little hard, so if there's anything you need us to zoom in on or clarify, let us know. So while he's logging in, Gluware Control, as we mentioned, can be cloud-based, running from AWS, which then would connect through a proxy on network to hit the network devices, or it can be deployed on-prem. Many of our customers are financials and other areas where they don't want software as a service directly touching their network devices, right? So it absolutely can be on-prem. And now he's logged into an on-prem version, is in our dashboard here.
So can it be both? Can it be both? Can I have on-prem and then I want to fail over to AWS if I lose my on-prem device? Can it be architected that way?
That type of failure is not there today. With AWS, you have built-in redundancies by region. When you deploy on-prem, there are installation guides we would advise for you to follow so you have backup. But right now, there is not a backup from an on-prem to cloud. It's something we could consider.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking if you have multiple data centers or something like that, say you have 10 data centers globally, and then you've got some assets in AWS, and you want to have localized
Right.
localized installation, but then be able to fail to something in AWS, for example.
Yeah.
Whether it's because of compliance or whatever the reason is.
Exactly. Well, I think what you'll see here is, again, we're going to be starting in this point from nothing running in Gluware for a given customer. So he'll show you the ability that we can create tenancy. So you can have one instance with multiple tenants of various networks, and then what you may do is, like, a customer may have a cloud version for the global WAN and an on-prem version for a data center. That could be possible, but they would be two separate instances.
Gotcha.
You can move packages between them, but may or may not make sense to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so this is the landing page of Gluware Control. So I'm going to show you how we start from scratch. So I have nothing set up, and what I'm going to show is I'm going to create an organization, and this is a way to really introduce multi-tenancy to the platform. So it could be organizations that you have within your company because you would like, the security team to be able to handle like their security nodes, and you got like the data center team that's going to, handle only their switches, etc. So this is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to introduce an organization. I'm going to call it Tech Field Day. And all the credentialed managements could be done within Gluware, but you can also have like LDAP integration here. I'm just going to do local for now. And so the way that you see this org is that you have. Let me not forget to switch to the right one that I just created. Tech Field Day. And within each org, then you have also RBAC built in, right? So you can have like a user that's got full-blown access, or maybe this is just like operations, and operations can only, have operation type related, actions like provisioning, but they can change the model, etc. Right? So consider Gluware like Gluware Control like. It works the same way like an iPhone and Android, right? So it means it's got apps. And right now what I'm going to do is I have nothing in this brand new organization. So we have a distribution center, equivalent of a store, and I'm going to install what I want to show you, right? So I want to install, device discovery. This is pretty quick. I want to install config drift. And then I'm going to show you config modeling, on a Cisco iOS router. I'm going to do this on Cisco iOS switch as well. Just takes a few seconds.
So generally, when we engage with a customer, we would be onboarding them, and so this is kind of part of the onboarding process. But then they would learn and be able to dynamically load packages as they go. For example, if they're using a feature set that they wanted an extension or an update, we push an updated package. They can dynamically grab that package from the distribution center, push it into their instance, and it's live. So it is truly a DevOps style of framework, so that we can deal with adding features in real time as needed. And so we can dynamically build and add them. If a customer has taken on the ability to build or augment packages themselves, they can own them and push them into their own instance as well.
I'm adding OS upgrade as well, because we're going to show that.
Those are the adapters we discussed earlier?
So there are packages that include the adapters.
Yep.
What he's loading is various components that some are kind of standalone apps, like OS upgrade is a feature set within the platform, or config modeling. And then another is a package or bundle of features that we've onboarded. So it's various forms of content that gets populated into the framework that you'll see.
All right, almost there. So the first brick, the first app I'm going to show you is, how you manage your devices, right? So the device manager is your entry point for, getting your hands on the nodes that you want to manage. Now, you can have two types of nodes. You can have nodes that you have full control over, and you can, read write, or it could be nodes where you only have read-only credentials. Typically, a service provider node, they manage the node for you. They just only give you visibility to the show run, but you have ways to onboard and, in fact, just check that they're doing what they what they say they're doing, right? They promised you a change. You can see if it's there. Sometimes they change things without you knowing about it, and it's a way for you to get control over that. I could add like a node manually, but what I'm going to do here is I have a spreadsheet here, so to show you, how quick that'd be. A spreadsheet with just like nodes and IPs, just credentials, just like very basic onboarding. I kept the names kind of neutral, just to show you that the engine's going to figure out what it is. Right now, I don't know what it is. There's an IP, username, password. I don't know what's behind. So I can just import here. Let me pull my Explorer, and I'm just drag and drop. This file here. You can see I have like all these different nodes here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to select them all and just say discover. So the bottom pane is what's allowing you to just play with the nodes, select them, and whatever. And the top pane is literally what's just the properties of the node that you've selected, right? So the engine is going like chasing up all these different nodes, and it's going to tell us exactly what's discovered. And you can see data appearing. So there's a whole mix of nodes here. Some Cisco router switches, Juniper router switches, and Fortinet. You can see some Fortinet here.
So just to add to this a little bit is that this engine is our device manager, and it's running a package called Device Detect. So it's a suite of packages for each vendor. So anytime we onboard a vendor, we have the vendor extension that allows us to read and write to that device. Then we add an element into our Device Detect engine that, for example, in Cisco, it's show inventory and show hard and show version, and we're teaching the engine how to pull out the interested fields. So in this first version, this is a new enhancement into Gluware control that has this enhanced engine with inventory. But it's a very extensible example. For example, we were in a financial customer, and they said, could you pull uptime? And we said, well, why would you want uptime? And they said, well, there's a particular vendor that at a certain amount of days uptime, there's a vulnerability that you could hit. So they want to actually go and reboot the nodes ahead of hitting the vulnerability, right? And so we extended the Device Detect library for that vendor within minutes, pushed the package, and then you had it there in the field. So I think this is where, out of the box, it has a lot of functionality. When we onboard the customer and understand exactly what they need in the product, this is where a little bit of fine-tuning happens of adapting to what they need. But essentially here, we are not doing SNMP or anything else. We're going and pulling a real-time status from the box each time you do a discovery. And we scale to tens of thousands of nodes in minutes.
Thank you, Mike.
Question.
Yes.
Can you give a subnet of devices and let it discover the devices, or it has to be always CSV?
Yeah. So that's an interesting, what he was asking about is, give it a subnet range and have us scan the subnet range. And an interesting feedback on that is that we had originally built a prototype with the Subnet Scanner, and the feedback from customers is that they didn't want it, that it was pulling in garbage, and it was not what they wanted. They preferred the method of, let me just give you a list of the IPs and the credentials and drop it in. And so we at this time, we didn't productize the ability to just walk a range and interrogate, but it's certainly something we could do if it was required.
And when the devices were discovered, you're pulling in all the data from SSH sessions, not SNMP, you said?
Yes. The information pulled is through today for these vendors, and the way we're interacting with those 18, those are SSH CLI. If there are vendors or platforms that we're adding or talking to via API, then we could be performing API calls.
So the spreadsheet or CSV had the credentials as well?
The spreadsheet has credentials. You can define, let's say you have a global credential that is valid. There are other ways to specify credentials. Sometimes you have single credentials that work across all because you're working on AAA or some authentication method. Or you can have, in some cases, there's per device credentials. So you can define it either way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is it fair to say the discovery that you're doing is not so much of a topology discovery? It's more I just need to know where all these devices are and inventory them, because if I want to push policy, I just have to be able to get to them and establish an SSH session. It's not LLDP, CDP. I'm going to crawl the network, not a topology-based discovery.
At this point, we have made a clear distinction on our platform from a monitoring platform that is SNMP based, and a platform which is more around now inventory, asset management, configuration management. So in 99% of cases, they already have that in their monitoring platform, so we're not kind of redoing the network map. The issue was more on the inventory side. That was the problem that we solved. We could add, and it's interesting and visual to see a topology for management purposes, but you'll see what we decided to visualize instead in the product is more around the data modeling, and you're going to see that in a few minutes.
Gotcha.
One thing to add is that some vendors expose some, APIs, not the nodes APIs. I mean their API, their data standards, and we're, adding within, the device manager, and also I'll demonstrate this in a second in OS upgrade. These APIs, we try to integrate them because they give you data like, EOX type, data. So end of life for this particular platform, end of life for this particular versions of software, etc. Or vulnerabilities that's been exposed for the version you're using, and we'll be able to just, flag this directly into the device manager. The other app that I want to show you is that now that I've got my nodes within the device manager, I can go in config drift here, and I can just select all these nodes here and say, okay, I would like to capture these very first, my first snapshot, right? And so I'm going to start capturing, the state, the state of all these different boxes here, and so I'm starting to archive, the configuration. So what's important here is that you want to archive the config not just for archiving. Is that what you want to know is that if someone is making like a change, you want to see it, right? So I'm going to do something pretty quick. Let's wait for the.
While that's happening, when you're pulling in this state, is it just the configuration that you're pulling?
Configuration state, yes.
It's just configuration state. So you're not pulling in any other state from the device or any other components like that. Like we're not talking MAC tables or CDP, LLDP, or anything like that.
I love the question. So right now, what I'm showing is only the configuration, but the framework is there for us to grab more. Now, a CAM table is definitely something under consideration. We got a customer saying, I want to be able to find this particular MAC address on all the switches that I have. Where is it? So these kind of pieces of information that you would like to track. This is definitely something that's we're.
I'm thinking for config change verification and validation. Here's all my IPs in the ARP table. Here's their associated MAC address. I do a change. I want to make sure all those same IPs are still reachable.
Yes.
Right. Those types of things.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll touch on that a little bit. Although right now it's not the focus of what we're showing. But what he was talking about is kind of the operational verification, right? So, and this is very common. And right, as I mentioned in this demo, we're not doing any config change, right? We're just monitoring for change. He's going to show a change that we detect right now. But with an operational state or operational workflow, you might run a bunch of show commands manually and do a bunch of verification, and you want to automate that process. So you might do a pre-check, a change, a post-check as a workflow, right?
Right.
So we do have a framework. There's multiple ways to slice that problem. One is a framework we have called workflows, which is basically built for operations, for troubleshooting or configuration step by step. And those can execute a series of shows and then do a regex for expected outcomes and essentially define pass-fail criteria. So that framework is there. Or we could extend our compare engine and just essentially compare, have a bunch of commands and you're just comparing the output. The problem with a flat compare is a lot of tables are changing anyway. You're going to have possible routes going up and down or MACs, joining and leaving. So those aren't, always, you might get more false positives than you want. So certainly The operational verification is something we're considering and can implement in the product. And again, that's mostly implemented upon on the onboarding. And you'll see it more again when we get to the config piece.
Okay.
So a quick question. So you're basically just pulling the running config from the devices. And then is there a way, let's say you pull in running config from 200 devices, any way to do a comparison to see the differences between those running configs?
That's a great question. So the compare engine today, and again, we're building off our first release of it, which was the ability, we really built it initially for audit type purposes to document change over a period of time. So when you detect a change, you either remediate that change or you document why it happened. So at the end of the quarter, you have documented all change, right? So, and it was per device, and this was for compliance purposes. What we have now been requested for in its roadmap, and we expect to deliver it this year, is more the golden file compare. But when you start to say golden file, it really opens up a big can of worms because you have to do selective, meaning you have to wildcard fields, you have to don't care. So it becomes a more robust product, right, in terms of what you're asking it to do, and we are developing that, definitely. Yeah, that's a great question, and you kind of frequently get it, but the problem is that one golden config won't match across all small branches or all there's still a lot of variability in that config. So.
And you'll see later in the demo when we'll show how you model the configuration and put into the product and put in the model your reference design for SNMP, for CORS, etc. How you can see the drift, and how you fix it, how the engine is going to fix it for you. So I made a very quick change. I just changed the description of the loopback interface here, and here I just repull the configuration, and you can see that it's flagging a problem, and I just changed it from welcome tech field day to welcome tech field day, hello, right? So, and here I can just say, well, this one is my new reference config, and the engine will take that into account. So from now on, the right-hand side one will be the one.
So with this
Can
engine,
you back out of that change? Like if you see something that somebody doesn't,
I'm sorry, say again.
Can you back out of a change that you see?
Yeah,
Like
so
that you found?
we're gonna get into that, which is again, we're pulling the config, we're comparing. We're the very next demo we get into actually management of features, right? So you could restore a config from the text file that's been captured, but what we're moving towards is to try to modernize away from trying to make a text file work again and move towards this model-driven approach, which you're going to see in the very next demo. Okay. The only thing I'll highlight is that we had the visual notification as I ran a manual change. You can also run a scheduled change and run every 12 hours or 24 hours, and you would get an email notification. There's forms of notification that you can trigger. So if you kind of want this thing running all the time, just notify me of change, then you get that indication.
So can you do that via like syslog or SNMP? Like if a config is changed, you can get a notification and respond to that?
So there are a few different ways to integrate. Today, the notification sends email, and we're adding SMS. You can potentially do API call as well, so you can push and notify. When you have kind of multiple systems, like syslog, you're going to have a log. The way we envision kind of integrating that is really more from dashboard visibility of what's going on across other systems, and so we're extending our dashboard with like visibility of syslog, for example. But today, there's not tight integration with like syslog, for example.
Yeah, I think my question more is, do you have that real-time integration so that are you waiting to scan for the changes, or can you respond in real time if I send an SNMP trap or a syslog message that the config has been changed?
Yeah. Okay, so yeah.
I can show a trigger quickly.
So he's going to show how we can be triggered by an external event. I'll also comment that right now, with config drift, you're just saying go pull all my network devices or a select number. Another aspect we can do is, at least on Cisco, we do support an EEM agent where the device would notify our engine of a change. So if you wanted more real-time notification of a change on a device, with Cisco we have the optional EEM agent that we would load. That agent would notify our engine of, hey, this node was changed by this user, And then you would, if you do kind of need more of that real-time notification. So that is also an option.
Here I'm showing you a trigger, so you can see that I can choose that the trigger is that the config drifted, right? And then you'll see later when you understand what config modeling is and this, the ability of the engine to go and fix and remediate problems, that this particular fixing could be triggered just because the config changed. So you can just put the whole thing, completely autonomic, and when anyone will just make that change, automatically the engine will go and fix that problem.